Hauser's law is a proposition that, in the United States, federal tax revenues since World War II have always been approximately equal to 19.5% of GDP, regardless of wide fluctuations in the marginal tax rate. The proposition was first put forward in 1993 by William Kurt Hauser, a San Francisco investment analyst, who wrote, "No matter what the tax rates have been, in post-war America, tax revenues have remained at about 19.5% of GDP. Hauser cited Arthur Laffer's concept of the Laffer curve in his original article. While the two concepts are similar, Hauser's law was put forward as an empirical observation, whereas the Laffer curve is a theoretical argument. This graph, updating the data up to 2007, confirms Hauser's law. The federal tax yield, revenues divided by GDP, has remained close to 19.5%, even as the top tax bracket was brought down from 91% to the present 35%. The data show that the tax yield has been independent of marginal tax rates during this period, but that tax revenue is directly proportional to GDP. As Hauser said, raising taxes encourages taxpayers to shift, hide, and underreport income. Higher taxes reduce the incentives to work, produce, invest, and save, thereby dampening overall economic activity and job creation. In other words, capital migrates away from regimes where it is treated brutally, and it moves towards a regime where it is freely and profitably invested. Daniel J. Mitchell has argued that Hauser's law has been observed due to the fact that the US does not have a national sales tax and instead collects tax in a federalist system, in contrast to many other Western nations. He also stated that the US has an inherently more progressive system as well. Thus, he concluded that the law represents a socio-political policy trend rather than a true economic law, and that the trend could change rapidly if value-added taxes are imposed at the federal level. Economist Mike Kimmel has stated that Hauser's law is misleading as it sweeps large differences under the table. He wrote that tax revenue is higher in the years following a tax increase and lower in the years following a tax cut. He defined the time periods 1951 to 1953, 1967 to 1968, and 1991 to 2001 as tax hike eras, and 1953 to 1967, 1969 to 1991, 2001 to 2010 as tax cut eras, and points out that tax revenues increase in tax hike eras and that tax cuts lead to lower revenues. It is misleading to refer to 1969 to 1984 as a part of a tax cut era, however, as the tax cuts of those times were compensating for bracket creep, as the era combined both high inflation with tax brackets not yet indexed for inflation. The tax cuts of that period merely kept taxes in line with inflation, and should not be conflated with later tax cuts which took place on top of a tax code already indexed for inflation. Journalist Jonathan Chait has written that swings are fairly dramatic through US history for tax receipts as a percent of GDP. He stated that the George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton administrations received massive extra revenues as a result of tax increases, while the George W. Bush administration tax cuts lead to a massive drop in revenues. He labeled the idea of static flat revenues as a scam. Hauser's law sure has a lot of controversy surrounding it, but many economists still swear by it, and the debate about it being true or not still goes on. That was all for this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel Explified. Follow our channel to get notifications about more interesting content.